All right, welcome to the Scott Abel Fitness Podcast. I'm Mike Forrest. I'm here with Scott Abel, and today we are talking about resistance bands, advantages, disadvantages, how to get the most out of the advantages, how to avoid the disadvantages, and then kind of some key takeaways at the end, especially for people who are just starting out with using them and have never used them before. Because there are a bunch of very specific advantages that Scott wants to go into that things like dumbbells or other implements just don't have. And so it's worth exploring that and viewing it as another tool in the toolbox. So with that, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. Like a couple of questions I've got is like from people, not my regular followers, but people just checking in. And hey, I saw like you're doing a lot of stuff with resistance bands. What's so special about resistance bands? And a lot of the times it's like, well, are resistance band just the new kettlebell? Like, is this just the latest TRX, the latest thing that we're gonna throw out there and offer certifications for, and all the rest of it, or is it just another tool in the toolbox? Well, it's a little of both, but as you know, you've known me for years and years, Mike, and most of my followers have known me for years and years as well. I don't get excited too often about just another tool in the toolbox. I've seldom ever used kettlebells or prescribed them in my training protocols because other things can easily substitute for them. And you're good to use a little mix and match of all the tools at our disposal, like machines and cables and dumbbells, barbells, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there are some exceptions to almost all the tools. And I'm excited about the resistance bands because they stand out in a number of ways. So I've been doing a number of basic resistance band exercises, hoping people can build on them from there. Because I think one of the mistakes I made in the past, like over a decade ago with Met training and stuff, is I started at the advanced level and then I worked my way back. So it was already way beyond what a lot of people could handle in terms of work capacity and stuff. So with resistance bands, I'm just starting with what look like normal exercises that people can can connect with. And oh yeah, okay, that's that exercise. Okay, that makes sense. And then we can get more complicated and more advanced as we go along. So there's a whole library of resistance band stuff starting with the basics. But
Yeah, we can talk. I think we should focus on that, especially towards the end, especially for those people who want to just sort of get started with resistance bands. And we can talk about, without necessarily going to a full program or trying to take resistance bands with you on vacation before you've ever used them before. Talk about doing substitutions here and there and where to start with that. And then we can also have links in the show notes for some of those exercises on your YouTube channel. So to begin, we have a few notes jotted down here for advantages, and I think they kind of break down into three broad categories. One would be versatility, the ability to travel. We can talk about that. Two, physique after 50 advantages, stuff like joint health, things like that. Similar to in your book, Physique After 50, you talk about using machines instead of, say, dumbbells and especially barbells. Resistance bands fit in there. And then third, and this is the one that I actually kind of want to unpack a bit, would be the innervation advantages, or another way of saying that might just be mind-muscle connection advantages. So why don't we start with the most obvious one, which to me is versatility, and talk about how you can take them with you on vacation, or you can create a whole program or a modified version of your current program with resistance bands once you actually know how to use them, or you know what kinds of substitutions are doable, basically.
yeah, so for instance, I did a video before my last trip where I was like, how to pack a gym and take it with you. I think about that for everyone listening. What other tool in the training toolbox besides body weight can you actually pack and take with you somewhere and then utilize? You're not going to pack a whole line of kettlebells. You're not going to pack a whole, line of even selectorized dumbbells because you're going to go over your weight and, airline, it's just not feasible. But I tossed a whole line of resistance band resistance levels into a gym bag with a couple of attachment items like hooks and everything, and threw it in my luggage. It barely weighed anything, and off I went. So That's the only tool in the training toolbox that actually travels other than body weight. So that's number one.
The other thing too is that once you get there, if there's a gym, like you can still use the gym, but then use the resistance bands in addition to it. And if the gym's not there, then you're flexible and you can do a complete workout using the resistance bands.
Can I expound upon that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
So we get to Aruba, and I always tend to stay in the same place because it's the only place in Canada that you can guarantee an oceanfront room. But the place where we stay, their gym sucks. Like it's a tiny little afterthought room. It has a multi-purpose cable slash machine, but it's already been overused and kind of broken. Like it's not, doesn't function the way it should. So I go in there and I just open up my gym bag of resistance bands and just empty it on the floor. And they got dumbbells that go up to like, I think 50 pounds, and a couple of them are broken. But by combining the two, I'm able to work around. A couple of people come in, they don't know what they're doing. You get a lot of that on vacation, the people who just think it's part of their vacation. Oh, well, I'll just go see what a gym is all about. And they're wandering around like occupying equipment. But boom, I dump them all on the floor. I attach a few behind dumbbells so they're anchored. A couple I attached to the balcony door that went outside. A couple of attachments, and then I didn't have to worry about who was using what. The dumbbells only went to 50 pounds, so for bench press and incline and stuff, I used heavier bands, and I was all set. So, and then as you know, I even did one of the workouts in the hotel room with no anchors at all beyond like the bed post and the couch post and whatever was accessible. So the versatility in that regard is incomparable, right? Like there's just no comparison. And you combine that with things like body weight exercises. And then the other element that I wrote down in terms of versatility is how many body part specific muscle building and toning exercise can you do with free weights from a completely lying down position. Again, the only resistance tool in the toolbox that I know of where you can do a multitude of isolation exercises for muscle development is resistance bands lying down, which offsets, of course, spinal compression, lower lumbar strain, things like that. So
it makes them useful if you're coming back from an injury or something along those lines.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So all kinds of options there that we displayed from a completely lying down position, pull downs, triceps, biceps, rows, leg extensions. You can't do that with dumbbells, barbells, cables. It's all awkward, right? But so the versatility, I mean, and you keep adding, right? The more you try this exercise, that exercise in this position, the more you learn about, oh, I can tweak it this way. I can tweak it that way. Like it just becomes
related to that. I think that might work as a bridge into the innervation advantages and the mind muscle stuff, because this is a versatility thing in a way, in that you can have a regular workout, but then you can use the resistance bands to switch it up or keep the program alive in ways that you can't do with just the weights. For example, you wrote down here, you can change your grip position. You can step sort of forward towards the resistance band so that you get a little less tension further on in the set, stuff like that. And I was actually curious about that because that to me sounds a lot like an extended set, for example, like almost like a mini strip set or something along those lines. And yet I know for most natural trainees, you're basically against that now. Going past failure is kind of too much. But with resistance bands, you seem to be okay with it. Can you speak to that, or why, or what you think is going on there?
well, yeah. Okay, there's a lot of various things going on in that question, but the one pertinent aspect of it is you can adjust tension within a set that you can't do with free weights. You can't adjust the dumbbell load in the middle of a set. You can do drop sets and things like that, but you can't, but with resistance bands, if you have an anchor position or whatever, you can step further to create more tension in the band. You can step closer to the anchor point to create less tension in the band. You can vary range of motion. You can choke up on your grip to create more tension. You can loosen the grip to create more tension. So as you're doing that, talk about mind muscle connection. You're actually feeling the muscle working, and you're feeling when failure is coming on. And by making these tiny adjustments, yeah, you can extend the set, but not in the way that it's typically done with free weights by going beyond failure, because the muscles are still functioning within rep execution. And by these small adjustments, you're not stopping because you're beyond failure, you're beyond the load. You're actually adjusting the tension level during the set. So it really helps, especially the neophyte trainers out there.
So more like
Really,
an asymptotic curve, like approaching zero. You're not quite actually getting to failure, but you're getting there
yeah,
without actually going past it.
you could go to failure if you wanted to. Of course, a lot of people know I don't advocate that for almost all the time, right? But you could certainly do that. And with resistance band, it's more applicable because there's less caveats. The reason I, caution against extended sets with free weights are many, like the wear and tear on the joints, going past failure, you can't recover, things like that. But this is a more natural way to extend a set and technically go beyond failure. Like I've done a couple resistance band examples where I've done one exercise and then just shown how to adjust it at the end to sort of pump out an additional 10 or 20 reps, which is a different type of extended set than with free weights, which goes beyond failure, has a lot more complications in terms of joint stress and things like that. So it's a much more natural feel once people start, getting a feel for them. But it also really enhances the mind muscle connection that a lot of people just can't get with free weights. And that's oftentimes what I hear from clients, right? Like, oh, Scott, I just, you know, I watched your exercise demonstration of, dumbbell, whatever, and I just don't feel it where I'm supposed to feel it. Like, it's like, okay, well, try it with resistance bands. And then sure enough, like, oh wow, it's a different type of tension. It's a different loading parameter, which I think makes it far easier for people with less experience to get that mind muscle connection. It's just a feel, like it's automatic feel for it, right?
Well, you mentioned at some point here the tricep bench dips, um, and basically peak contraction. Because one of the things about resistance bands basically is that you're going to have the most resistance at kind of the peak of the set, which gives you, well, a good mind muscle connection, basically.
Yeah, the peak contraction stuff you can do is insane, and that's what I was just going to say. Like you can adjust range of motion, right? Even within the set. So like the one I just posted with the tricep bench dips, right? You wrap I mean, there's no point in describing it. We can just put the actual video in the show notes and people can see. But the comparison I make in the video is most people, the guys who fancy themselves as, plate heads, hardcore bodybuilder kind of types, they do the tricep bench dips and they load a bunch of plates on their lap, right on their thighs. But that's not within the plane of function of the tricep. So it's a little heavier load, but it's not really because it's not directly over where the tricep functions. So by wrapping the resistance band around the shoulders and then gripping it and increasing the tension, then every time you come up with that reverse grip push up, you just get this intense peak contraction that you can't get. Like you're not going to get it any other way. And there's a lot of exercises like that. Like you can do an angled bicep curl, for instance. Like one of the supersets that I started doing was the first half of the rep with dumbbells, and then walk over to the resistance band and do the last half rep on an angled plane and just doing like the top half of the rep, and the pump is insane. So, I mean, you can't do that with free weights. Imagine trying to do a horizontal half rep curl with dumbbells. It changes the gravitational forces in a way that's not conducive to a peak contraction. And it makes it really hard on the joint because you're trying to stabilize your shoulder in a horizontal plane, which, increases the forces on the joint, which you can alleviate with resistance bands. And you can't really do that there's a lot of exercises that resistance bands can duplicate for cables, but the reverse isn't true. I've tried them with my functional trainer. There's stuff that I can do with my resistance bands that I should be able to do with the functional trainer, but it doesn't feel the same. The cable exercise is not nearly as engaging as the resistance band exercise.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, for instance, the horizontal shoulder press. So walking the resistance band out, bending over to 90 degrees like you would for a bent row or whatever, and then doing a shoulder press that way rather than vertically, right? Which for me, with my advanced arthritis and stuff, I can do those, but the vertical ones just hurt too much with cables and stuff. But I tried it with the functional trainer, and it's okay, but it's not like the resistance band is like, oh yeah, this this feels really good. So
Can you speak to what the difference is?
it's a natural feel in the plane, like whereas the cable didn't feel natural. It's like it just felt like it worked okay, but it wasn't as effective as a vertical. Whereas doing it with the resistance bands, you can feel that it's as good as press overhead. So again, it's one of those things that is a biofeedback thing you feel immediately when you do it, right? It's just acclimating yourself to the new tool. And it's just as soon as you do, it's like, okay, well, if it feels like that for this exercise, then it probably will feel like that for that exercise and that exercise. And that's why I get so excited about it, because it's so transferable to other exercises in that plane, right?
SmarterSculptedPhysique.com.
Okay, so speaking of peak contraction and muscle pump and things like that, you also noted supersets and trisets here. Now, by that, do you mean doing like one exercise with, say, dumbbells or barbells, and then doing the second exercise with resistance bands, or doing both resistance bands, or the latter two or latter three even? And depending on which, what is the advantage of the resistance bands? Is it purely about getting that pump when you're sort of already one exercise in, or is it purely about convenience and the way sort of the just sort of necessities of working in maybe in a busy gym? Why do you like them so much, basically, for those supersets, trisets, quadplexes, even?
Well, it's all those things, right? Like it's not absolutes. It's not like black or white, or if this then that. It's all those things. So not just do they lend themselves to supersets and trisets and stuff, but biplexes and triplexes. One of the number one negatives that not negatives, but number one issues people experience when they're trying to do hard gainer or whatever. Hey Scott, I train at the gym after work and it's just packed in there. I can't occupy two or three pieces of equipment. I want to do the hard gainer. Like, what am I going to do? Well, with resistance bands, you take up one piece of equipment, let's say, like for your dumbbell exercise or your machine exercise or whatever, and then your other exercise, exercise B, exercise C, is with your own resistance bands right there. You're not taking up space. You're not taking up equipment. You're not in anybody's way. Like, so it just makes it like, okay, now it's doable. I can do biplexes, triplexes, supersets. I've been experimenting now with doing resistance bands as the second exercise in supersetting body parts. So, I'll do like a chest day. So I'll start with just one exercise that's just dumbbells, and then my typical GPP for lower body. But then the next exercises will be like a cable exercise in one plane, supersetted with resistance band exercise in another plane, that kind of thing, right? So, and just experimenting with that. And the fun factor in that is, yeah, it's just like there's certainly no limits when, I mean, you have to have a basic understanding of biomechanics and exercise physiology, but beyond that, the stuff you can experiment with, like, I can do, let's say, a flat dumbbell fly, right? And then I can take a resistance band and wrap it around my back and superset that with an incline chest press. Boom. You know what I mean? So you got the fly motion and you're supersetting it with press motion without even, I could do that in a busy, well, I was doing it in Aruba. And let's say I'm doing the standing no anchor incline chest press. If I take a step forward and then lean forward, I can turn that immediately into a decline press with the same band, no occupying equipment, no, all I do is change the plane and the gravitational force with the same band wrapped around my back, no anchor needed, no. So the versatility advantages and stuff.
This is kind of innovation 101, but what are the advantages to doing something like that? Like, what are the advantages to switching it up to almost supersetting or biplexing multiple ranges of motion within a single muscle group or things along those lines? For the trainee, like why would they want to do that as opposed to just doing one single incline dumbbell bench press or something along those lines?
Well, depending on the program, you would do that. But in terms of the innovation primer and stuff, I mean, one of the key lessons of innovation training is ranges and plane of motion affect fiber recruitment. Innovation is as or more effective than load. So what we see with hard gainers, physique after 50, people like that, the old myth, the old that never dies, the old just lift heavy shit, that's not going to transfer for everybody. Like half the population out there goes to the gym with that mindset and never makes any gains. Oh, I got to bench press 5 by 5 and I got to write down, this much weight and, I got to increase that weight every week. And then, 2 or 3 years later, all they got is sore joints and disappointment. Whereas this deliberately connects you to that mind muscle connection in different planes and ranges of motion in a way you can feel. Like the biofeedback of it is immediate. So you, like I said, you can adjust right in the middle of a set, range of motion. You can adjust plane of motion. You can adjust the level of tension. You can't do that with any other training tool in the toolbox.
So you mentioned earlier that there are situations where you would, instead of doing a superset with resistance bands, like it's not, what we're not just saying is that, well, you should always do that. Those are like the number one things to do. And like, it's that way and the only way, but rather there are actual situations where you would just do one simple compound exercise with dumbbells or barbells. And that depends on the program design. I realize that this gets pretty complex pretty quick, but can you speak to when you would do one versus the other?
Well, yeah, and it's not just program design, it's program assignment, right? And program assignment has to do with assessing an individual's need state, which is all in the ABLE approach and the program design masterclass. So you're assessing where someone's at and what they might need now relative to where they're at. So a lot of the times, yeah, a typical traditional bodybuilding program fits the bill. Like single exercise, maximum rest between sets, and then training to relative failure, makes sense. And you can go back and forth between programs. But what I'm saying, we never want to give the impression, especially with the ABLE approach, of, either or, black and white, absolute. There's all kinds of variances. So one of
But
the
can you give some examples of a need state where you would use one or the other?
well, let's say someone's a hard gainer and they come and they say, well, I've been running for 12 weeks. I did a mini marathon with my girlfriend because she wanted me to. And I've never really ever gained much muscle. And I was running and doing abs and doing this and doing that. Well, they've never been on the right track for hypertrophy training. So you assign them, depending on the assessment, a 3, 4, 5 day program based on body part training, and you specifically surf the reps curve, right? I mean, stuff we've talked about a million times. And then that would do them for that particular program. But eventually their need state would change because, the old saying is all good programs work, all good programs don't work forever. So, assessing when someone's adopted to that particular protocol, then you can do a bunch of things. You can assign a new program, you can assign tweakology to the existing program, which is where something like resistance bands can come in, right? Like, this is what I like about it, Mike. Regardless of program, let's say someone's on a traditional innovation training program with mixes up barbells, dumbbells, and machine work. And then, oh God, I got to be away at a conference for the next 4 weeks. I'll be in a hotel room. Like, what am I going to do? Well, you're going to do your best mimic of those exercises with resistance bands, which you can almost always do, which you can't take it with you, right? So, and it's a crapshoot, right? Like the one thing about where I'm at now professionally is I deal a lot more now with people who aren't in their 20s and have all day to go to the gym and all day to recover and, you know, don't do much of anything else unless they work in the gym or they're personal trainers. I deal with professional people now who, the example I just gave, having to attend conferences for an extended period of time or be out of town for an extended period of time is a very real thing. So they're like, they don't know, let's say their company's putting them up in a hotel. They don't know how good or bad that hotel gym is. Most of them suck. They don't know how long they'll be at a conference. One of the things that makes me laugh, fitness conferences, for instance, is they get so booked up that they don't even leave time for people attending a fitness conference to do their fitness training. Like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, well, the next 12 hours are spoken for. So, well, what are you going to do? Where are you going to find the time? And if you do have the time, what if the hotel gym sucks? Well, you can do something in your hotel room between body weight and resistance bands.
I think like if you're traveling, I mean, obviously you have to do what you have to do, right? And resistance bands are a great way to do that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier tweakology, where basically you take an existing program that maybe you've adapted to pretty well already, and you start introducing resistance bands here and there just to keep the program alive. Can you speak to when you would do that and when you would not want to do that? Like, for example, a trainee just really needs to stick to the program for the first 8 weeks, or depending on the trainee and their ability to keep the program alive in an intelligent way, things like that.
Yeah, if someone's, feeling like the program's a little stale, mind you, a lot of that is just a mindset thing. Or they'll say like they can't really go up and weight anymore, because it's too big a jump and they can't get the reps and they're not really feeling it like they used to in the beginning of a protocol, which all those things are normal, right? So you throw in resistance band, which changes the nature of the overload, and the body gets that, right? The body is like, this is different. Like, I'll give you an example. Something I started doing in my Aruba workouts, just thought I'd try. Like again, I could have used the dumbbell, but I just, for some reason, it stuck out to me. And I've been doing it at home recently. So I was doing split squats with a front dumbbell hold, chest hold. And then I thought, oh, you know what? Let's try it with resistance bands. So I put the bottom end of the resistance band under my foot that was grounded, right? And then I do up to a prayer stance. So I take the resistance band up to chest level. And of course, there's not much tension at the bottom of that movement. But when you get to the top and the resistance band gets stretched, holy crap, the next day in the glutes and the upper thigh, like I didn't get that with the dumbbell. They got a little sore, but nothing compared to that kind of varying resistance with just instituting the resistance band. So again, doesn't have to be either or. The person exercising tweakology, they could do, if they have split squats on their protocol, their program, for example, there's nothing wrong at a certain point in the program with one workout, do the split squat with resistance band, and the next workout, do it with a dumbbell. So you're, like the tool you employ changes the
I
nature
mean, this
of,
might be a large question, but how much tweakology like that is too much?
well, if people are changing stuff, they don't have a varied level of experience and they're changing stuff just for the sake of changing stuff. Like you see people, that's what we call pinballing, right? People do it with workouts, they do it with, programs. They read something on this website, they're doing that today. Tomorrow they're doing something which is the antithesis to that, and they're wondering why nothing ever happens, right? So with my programs, like we see in Program Design Masterclass, and we emphasize over and over again, it's either load specific or it's rep specific. Usually, those are our foundational elements of program design, and it can be a combination of both. So if they're following the parameter of how and why something's designed, then they're okay to vary the tools that they use, cable, machine, dumbbell, whatever. And sometimes it's specific, right? A lot of my programs are like, dumbbell incline press or machine chest press or, and sometimes there's options. But usually it's a rep scheme variant. So if someone's you know, just tossing stuff in, well, then, That's not going to get someone very far, no matter how good the tool is, right? We see that with every new training tool that comes out, right? Like kettlebells came out a while ago. You get a line of kettlebells. Everyone's getting certified in kettlebells, and all of a sudden, every exercise is done with kettlebells, whether it feels right or is advantageous or not. All of a sudden, it's kettlebells, and then it's TRX, and then it's so that kind of thing. Like,
Can you speak to um, you mentioned rep specific programs and where you can pretty much make changes there as long as you're staying within the rep scheme and you're hitting the same muscle and the same generally same range of plane of motion. Is it fair to say that resistance bands have maybe less of a place, or perhaps the tweakology we're talking about has less of a place in a load emphasis program?
no, I wouldn't say that, because if you get several resistance bands, it's like having a whole rack of dumbbells, right? Not to mention that you can adjust the tension within the actual exercise without jumping to the next band, right? You tighten up your grip, like I said, you create more tension, range of motion, things like that. So you could technically do 5 sets of 5 with resistance bands, like for bench press, for instance, right? Like you, with or without an anchor, you wrap it under your back, come up from your armpits, and you choose a resistance band that's heavy enough where you can barely squeeze out 5, boom, 5 sets of 5.
SmarterSculptingPhysique.com.
What would be the number one way to make sure you're progressing in a reasonable way for that? Like, should you be moving a bit further away first? I mean, well, I suppose there is gradation depending on the types of resistance bands you have, but being very clear in those progressions, like it seems to me it gets quite a bit harder with resistance bands.
Not really, not once you're using them. Someone who would say that is someone who obviously hasn't employed them long enough to get a feel for them, right? One of the things I like about it when I wrote this down is it gets the trainee beyond looking at load. Oh, I'm making progress because now I'm lifting 60-pound dumbbells instead of 50-pound dumbbells. Whereas, let's say you've got the black resistance band and you're doing 5 sets of 5, but then you choke up on it and it's harder. You can feel it's harder. So you get 5 sets of 5 before you go up to the purple band. But you're no longer like, I'm making progress because of this external cue of a heavier dumbbell. And you're more connected to the internal cue of the level of tension on the muscle. So it can actually be better.
All right, I guess I'm confused about the degree to internal cues or how you balance internal cues with external cues, especially when we're talking about a load specific program. It seems to me in a load specific program, you should be pretty focused on external cues.
Well, let's say 5 sets of 5, right? Like I pick a band. I'm starting with a home gym and I can't afford any power blocks yet, but I've got a bench. So I've got a bench and I've got some bands because Scott said that's all I need. So I lay down with my band and I mimic the bench press. And with the pink band, I can blow out 12 to 15. I choke up on that for my next set. I can blow out 10 to 12, still pretty easy. So now, just like I would with a dumbbell, I jump up to the next band. I lay down, I mimic the bench press. Ooh, 6 to 8, that felt hard. So now I can choke up on that band a little more and I can adjust the range of motion accordingly. And I got my 5 sets of 5. Or I can jump up to the next band and decrease the range of motion a bit in terms of where I'm gripping it. And I got my 5 sets of 5, right? So,
I guess what I'm saying is I think it's hard to, especially once you reach a strength plateau of some sort. It seems that consistently choking up just the right amount each week gets hard than it does with, say, weights. Like I do realize you can feel it, but like there's also a degree to which there's a value in having an external number or an external goal to hit that like, look, I did this, I did X last week, and I know this program tells me I should be able to hit X plus 5 pounds this week. That's my goal. Doesn't matter. I just have to do that. And like, that's that. Whereas with resistance bands, you have to kind of choke up the right way, maybe adjust your feet just the right way. And I mean, it seems to me it would be possible to be playing head games where it's like, actually, have I choked up more than I did last week, or have I like? It just seems harder to me. And like I've used resistance bands extensively, so it's not like I've never used them here.
And I would argue the exact opposite because I mean the whole argument in the able approach, right, is train the muscle, not the movement, and the muscles work the weights don't work the muscles. So we kind of flip the typical script in traditional training around. Because I would argue I see the exact same issue with people trying to use weights, right? Oh, I'm so frustrated. I can get 5x5 with 75s, but I can't get 80s for even 2 or 3. And so I'm not making any progress. That's the same kind of thing as like you eliminate that just by using bands because you don't know how much tension there. All you know is the tension on the muscles. So as long as you're getting the 5 sets of 5 reps, you're in that what we call the range of success, right? Now, of course, it's going to take some level of experience and a level of feel and whatever, but it's definitely something that that can get people past that sticking point of just this linear idea. I should be able to lift 5 pounds heavier this week because my program says so. I don't write programs that ever say that, not even strength programs. I never say like this percent of 1 rep max and this week
I
increase.
thought we were talking about the 5x5.
No, we are, but I still don't. I don't demand loads. I don't demand a linear strength increase because there's too many factors that can determine that. And a lot of progress is never linear, right? So we get back to if your goal is muscle development and to look good naked, then you get past like the linear periodization stuff and you get to how do I teach the trainee to feel that muscle working in the right rep range so that they know that the muscles work the weights don't work the muscles in terms of a mindset. Obviously both things are true at the same time, right? You can't just grab a 5 pound dumbbell and make gains forever. And you can't grab the lightest resistance band and make gains forever, right? Like, oh, I went to Walmart and bought the resistance band in a box. I'm set for life. Like, no, that's like having your 5 pound dumbbell and saying your home gym's equipped. You know what I mean? So it's the rep schemes that sort of matter and the ranges and planes of motion. But in terms of the mind muscle connection, the resistance bands have a lot to offer in terms of, wow, I never felt that before. I can feel it now. Or this feels just as good as using free weights, et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention, we haven't even talked about joints yet.
Okay, so let's talk about joint health. What are some of the advantages of resistance bands? And just because we're now at 40 minutes, can you speak to how to best take it? Sounds silly, but take advantage of those advantages.
Yeah, and one of the things like about less wear and tear on the joints is something that came from feedback I was getting. So once I started advocating the resistance bands, I thought it was just me, right? Like, and a lot of my followers know I have pretty advanced osteoarthritis in my shoulders, which 10 years ago I was supposed to have shoulder replacement, and I still haven't because I've been able to work around it in a number of ways. And going to resistance bands, I was really able to work around it even better and go back to doing stuff I couldn't do before without, days of like, no function at all in my shoulders. But then a lot of physique after 50 clients were writing me and going, holy crap, Scott, like my joints doing the resistance bands. It's like freedom, that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, okay, like jot that down for client X. Oh, now jot that down for client Y. Oh, jot that down, for this client, that client. So it became an obvious positive return that people were self-reporting without me saying anything, and just their biofeedback. Again, one of these things that they could just feel, right? So there's obviously less wear and tear on the joints using resistance bands. And again, I think it's because it keeps people in a very natural range and plane of motion within exercise function, right? They're not going to go to extreme ranges and planes of motion because it just won't feel right. Um, So there's that kind of element to it. Like I said, it's something that you will feel. I mean, not the very first exercise, very first workout, of course, because you've got the cumulative effects of everything else you've been doing. But over time, oh, I substituted this exercise for that exercise. Like even chronic conditions like tendonitis and stuff. Like, okay, let's use resistance bands for a while. When you're doing exercise, someone has tendonitis in their elbow. So, okay, let's avoid the exercises where that aggravate it. So they're not doing barbell lying tricep extensions. So instead, I get them to use sort of resistance band tricep pushdown. But they'll be able to, within that exercise, they'll be able to adjust the range of motion to where, oh, okay, I can still get something out of my triceps doing it this way, but I don't have to do a full range of motion because it aggravates the tendonitis. So it's something you can feel right away in application. Same thing with my shoulder, right? I can feel right away what I can get away with or not get away with. Whereas a lot of the machines are fixed and a lot of the dumbbell stuff is fixed, right? Like I said, I can do that horizontal press for shoulder, but I can't toss up dumbbells over my head and bring them down. I can't even get into that position, nor can a lot of other people, right? For lower back issues or whatever. So um, that's what I mean. You can do the same exercise, mimic the same exercise in different ways without a lot of risk.
So would the takeaway here be to one, replace those exercises that clearly hurt this or that joint, and two, take advantage of the fact that with resistance bands, you can adjust the range and plane of motion in small ways until you get something that actually is not producing as much stress that it's actually producing pain or something along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. And again, what you can do with resistance bands, especially the ones without handles, the flat bands, is again to vary within the exercise that you can't do. Like, okay, cable tricep push downs, right? You got the attachment on there, you're pushing it down, you're a peak contraction at the floor, but you can't do anything beyond that. With a resistance band, tricep push down, you can go, and as you get to the floor, you can widen your arms out, right? You can push your thumbs down toward the floor and your baby fingers up toward the ceiling and add to that peak contraction like you can't do holding on to a straight bar. For chest press, if I step through a resistance band and walk it out, one without handles, I mean, like so I got a straight band in front of me, and I mimic a chest press machine, when I get to the peak contraction part of that, I can widen my hands out to emphasize that. I can bring them in more narrow. I can turn my thumbs up toward the ceiling. So you can do stuff within the actual exercise using flat bands that you can't do with cables, machines, dumbbells, barbells, none of that stuff.
Is
So
there a danger in, especially if we're talking about stress on the joints, is there a danger in trying to get too much out of it when you really just need to give that joint a break or something along those lines? Like if we're talking about changing, adjusting, tweaking the range of motion just so it doesn't hurt. I mean, are there times where, well, maybe you should just not use your shoulders today?
yeah, I mean, there's always that, right? Like there's a difference
Like
between
how does one negotiate where that line is?
biofeedback, right? Like pain is a good biofeedback indicator. There's a difference between, well, in sports, we say there's a difference between being hurt and being injured, right? Being hurt, you can work around it. Being injured, you should never try to work around it, right? So now yeah, of course, there's some, there's two risks, but that's true of any kind of training implement and the mindset behind it. There's the being so cautious that you're not getting anything out of the exercises you're choosing because you're being so cautious that your, say, range of motion is ridiculous, or you're trying to tweak so much. Like that's the one I'm guilty of, right? I have so much fun with them, but my shoulder is, especially my right shoulder, is so whacked, right? Like sometime I'll try this tweak and see if it's less painful, right? It's like, oh, no, that was more painful. That's going to cost me a couple days of recovery, right? So, but you're only going to learn by doing. So that's true of anything, though, right? And expertise goes a long way correcting those things. But I like about, like, again, that overhead shoulder press. I can do that with resistance bands because I can put one under my foot, I can clean it up, and then I can press it overhead without coming all the way down to a point that hurts. And then, mind you, you can also spread your legs wide to create more tension. If the band is locked under your foot, you can bring your feet closer together, create less tension. You can go under 1 foot, under 2 feet. So sometimes the way I create tension for overhead shoulder press is I start with first set is under my right foot, second set's under my left foot. By the third set, same exact bands. Now it's under both feet. More tension, more tension, more tension.
SmarterSculptedPhysique.com.
So with some of that in mind, why don't we talk about where to get started with resistance bands? And in terms of that, even before we talk about how to integrate them into the workout or how to begin integrating them into the workout or something along those lines, like what should people buy? Like where should they get started there?
Well, funny, I'm getting that question a lot. And you can buy them anywhere. There's all kinds of brands now. I mean, you can buy them, online. You can buy them at, I bought some of my better ones at Sport Check. Like everywhere has them now. And if you live in a big enough city, you have fitness supply stores like we have here, Flamin Fitness, Rocky Mountain Fitness, all those places sell. Like I said, even Walmart sells them, but the ones at Walmart are a bit lame. Now, I prefer the flat handle bands, but I do have a supply of both just in case. So I have ones with handles, but I prefer the ones without handles because I just find they're so versatile. And you can create your own handle just by the way you wrap your palms around them, which again is another variation, right? Like if I wrap it a certain way and the band is between my thumb and forefinger, that offers me a certain level of resistance. But if I move that out so the band is around the outside of my baby finger, just doing that with the same band, I've got even more resistance.
So I'm on Amazon right now. I'm looking at 17-piece resistance band set workout bands, includes 5 stackable exercise bands. We've got green extra light, which is 5 to 10 pounds, blue light, which is 10 to 15 pounds, medium yellow, which is 15 to 20 pounds.
Are these
Red, yeah, red heavy 20 to 30, black extra heavy 30 to 40. And they're all like they've got hooks on the end, but then they've also have handle attachments you can use. Plus some like ankle straps and some other stuff. Like, is that the kind of thing people should get started with?
and the flat ones?
I mean, it's hard. I actually can't tell if these are flat. It's weird.
Oh, you can tell by looking at them if they're flat or round.
No, like they've got 2 pictures. One's it shows them as round. One it shows them as flat. So.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's 2 sets. I see. So it's both. You're getting both.
Yeah, it's probably two. Now, the one thing I would caution any experienced trainer or a trainer who's trying to, explain this or teach resistance band training to someone who's not used to them is forget all about it's this many pounds of resistance because it doesn't translate. Like I said, if you choke up on a resistance band in a certain range and plane of motion, you're going to get way more resistance than that band is meant to offer, right? And vice versa. And some of my bands, like my heavy band, I often use just to anchor the other bands in because they're so friggin' heavy. Like they're really heavy. So what are mine now? One is Core or something, Core FX, and the other one is Explode. The advances in what we can do with the flat bands, they're just way more versatile without the handles and stuff. Like I said, you can get behind them, you can walk them out and do like mimic machine presses and all kinds of stuff. So the body elastics are good too, but the flat bands are far and away the most versatile. There's 100 million variations I can think of. So
let's assume someone basically gets one of these starter sets from Amazon. So they've got enough where they can at least start experimenting, and especially they can learn about how they feel, mind, muscle, stuff like that. Where should they start in terms of integrating them into their workouts themselves? How many exercises maybe should they do? Should they stick to only doing it for 1 or 2 exercises at the end or even at the beginning? Like what would you recommend generally?
I would say at the end of a workout, if you're just starting out, let's say it's a chest day or a whole body, doesn't matter, right? Just at the end of your workout, so you know you haven't sacrificed anything where you're going to say, well, that blew my workout, or that spoiled this, or that spoiled that. Just at the end of your workout, think of an exercise that you want to mimic, an exercise that you know real well, right? Like, oh, I know overhead shoulder press really well. I'm going to try to mimic that with my new band.
Could it also be one where, say, a trainee has a very good sense of like this might be just exactly what you mean, but a very good sense of the mind muscle connection?
Oh yeah, well, it's unlimited once you have that. Well, once you have that, you can experiment with, like for instance, myself, right? Not only as an expert in exercise physiology and biomechanics, but 4 decades of hanging and banging in the gym. I don't have to look to, oh, can I mimic an overhead shoulder press with the resistance band? Of course I can. What I start experimenting with, which is a whole lot of fun, is like I said, like I can start with a standing chest press with the resistance band, right? They're behind my back, no anchor, and it's just a straight chest press. But then I angle it up a bit, it's an incline press. I lean forward, it's a decline press. So I've been doing that with like the horizontal shoulder press, horizontal bicep curls, like all kinds of like little mini tweaks and variations of the planes, right? All of a sudden that's how we discovered, for instance, we were doing the side laterals from a lying position, right? You put the base of the band, under your feet. You're lying straight out, and then you do side lateral raises with the bands, and you can get like this full range of motion, and you just start experimenting. Like it just, yeah. If you have any kind of level of experience with mind muscle connection, then you just get the fun factor enters into it, right? Because you can.
Well, I guess I'm almost wondering about those trainees who have limited experience with the mind muscle connection. Like, I don't know. They get a very good mind muscle connection for biceps when they're doing 1,000 sets of curls, but less so when they're doing chest work or leg work. Or should they start with what they're already good at to get a sense of what resistance band should be? And I mean, this might be one of those things where it's a false dilemma, but or try to use the resistance bands to get a better mind muscle connection in what they're kind of lacking in or what they're struggling with.
No, I think it makes sense to start with what you're familiar with that you like. Why start with something you're unfamiliar with that you don't even know how it's supposed to feel or you've never felt before? Then you're just going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, that didn't work. You know what I mean? But whereas, if you, like you said, let's say bicep curls, right? You like a standard cheat curl. So you take the resistance band, you lock them under your feet, you start doing a cheat curl with those, and then you're like, oh, okay, I can choke up the band this way. I can supinate my hand better this way. Well, what if I just peak contract and go halfway down? What if I go all the way down and I, blah 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 blah, right? So you're with something you already get a good response to, and then you're just sort of playing with it. That's going to make you want to use that particular tool more often and try it in different varying circumstances and ways, right? So, and then there's just stuff like people haven't thought of, right? If they look at my resistance band exercises, like they'll be like, holy crap, right?
Well,
Like,
I was going to say that'd be a good way to start. Just to, I mean, if you go through the exercise, you can figure out pretty easily what body parts are involved, and then it's like take your pick, or like take your pick of what the substitution is.
yeah, and there's just so many ways, right? Like, one of the things I did with Byron that just popped into my head, like training someone at the gym. Oh, there was like 3 people on the lat pull down. So it was, let's say, okay, like take the resistance band, lock out over your head, and then instead of pulling them both down, use the lockout arm as your anchor and do one arm at a time and pull down with the other arm. So now you're doing pull downs with resistance bands in a way you've never even thought of before. Because again, you can't on a lat pull down machine, you can't do it that way, alternating hands or one arm at a time, right? You're just like, it's doable, but it's not. And then your body's going to feel that in a different way. Your body's going to know this is different. This is a different innervation pattern, right? So there's great payoffs for that, right? So it's not like everybody's trying to have like a Mr. Olympia physique, right? So we're speaking to people who want, they want to see a difference, but they're not, cycling steroids and trying to be the next Mr. Olympia or whatever. I'm not speaking to that population anyway.
So I think that might be a good way to end it. People can check out the show notes. What I will do is I will post links to Scott's resistance bands playlist. He's also got ones where he talks about which bands to buy and setting up his home gym. He's got stuff about his the workouts he did in Aruba with resistance bands and things like that. I'll have links, resources, all things like that at the show notes, which you can find at scottabelefitness.com/podcast. And until then, we will see you next time.